What did we do and why did we do it? So in essence, back in 2018, Council undertook a community survey to get a sense of how the community feels about services and facilities. I'm talking about roads, rates and rubbish. So one of the primary aims of this survey was in 2020, was to update that, to see where you've moved over the 2 years. But we wanted to go further. So what we wanted to do was insert some open-ended questions into the survey and find out from residents how they're feeling about the community, what their priorities are for the future. We also wanted to check, like I say, the roads, rates and rubbish, satisfaction. But again, we want to go deeper than that. We want to understand the drivers. There are lots and lots of services and facilities that council offers, but which ones are truly driving satisfaction amongst the community members? We also want to understand how the community feels about contacting council, how that has worked for them. And then finally, and probably very timely, we added some questions in 2020 about community resilience so that you have a benchmark on where the community is in terms of resilience and where it's going. So how do we do the research? It was a telephone survey to 604 residents. Telephone is still the way to reach most and the most representative sample of respondents. And I say that because you can use multiple sample sources. So for instance, we use the electronic white pages to get to residents. But of course, not everybody's got a landline anymore. So we buy lists from companies such as Sample Pages, and they can give us lists of mobile phone numbers for younger residents so that we can hone in on the younger residents. And finally, we do what's called number harvesting, where we stand on street corners throughout the local government area and we don't do the interview with people on the spot because it's too long, but we recruit them to do the survey and then we will contact them later by phone and do the survey. So in fact, 141 of the 604 came from that face-to-face number harvesting. So a number of different sample sources to make sure that we got a representative sample. And when was the research done? Back in November last year. So let's go through the 5 key areas that we've broken up the results into. This is a very long report. I think it's 130, 140 pages. We've condensed it down, so I apologise if I skip over things, but there is just so much to go through. And what I want to do is start by talking about overall satisfaction with council. We use a 5-point scale from not at all satisfied, which is given a code of 1, up to very satisfied, which is given a code of 5. And what we're showing there on the chart is the results in blue for 2020 and in green for 2018. Now I will preface it to say that the 2018 question was slightly different, but in essence it's reasonably comparable. And in fact, as you can see, from the bars, the blue and the green bars, the results are very similar. If you look at the actual scale from not at all satisfied to very satisfied, we can calculate a mean score. If everybody said not at all satisfied, the mean would be 1. If everybody said very satisfied, the mean would be 5. The cell that I've just highlighted in the chart shows that in 2020, your mean score was 3.91 out of 5. And that compares to 3.88 in 2018. Again, question was slightly different, but you can see very similar results. But this is where it gets really interesting. Micromex has been doing this for a number of years with many, many councils across New South Wales. And in fact, we have got benchmarks based on almost 38,000 different respondents across many, many different councils. And your mean score of 3.91 is well above our benchmark of 3.55. So that's really good starting point in this presentation tonight is overall satisfaction with council is already above our norm, and in fact it's one of the highest results we've had in about 10 years, so that's a very good result. We also asked a question about quality of life. And this is important because overall you want a sense of how the community is feeling, but you also, because we're going to ask questions about resilience later on, we can look at resilience within the context of quality of life. This is a 6-point scale this time, from 1 very poor up to 6 excellent. And what we're doing here in the deep blue is showing you the 2020 result, but in the light blue score is actually the 2019 result. And 2019 was when we did a survey for you using the exact same question as part of a social wellbeing survey. And if you look at the cell that I've just highlighted in purple, you can see even at the end towards the end of last year, when we were 7-8 months into COVID, overall quality of life was 5.22 out of 6. Whereas back in 2019, pre-COVID, it was 5.14. So it's not significantly increased, but it is up on 2019, which isn't a bad result given COVID and so on and so forth. And again, we have a norm. This time only based on almost 7,000 respondents, but our norm is 4.9 out of 6, and your score of 5.22 is well above norm. So again, you can see that generally speaking, you have got a satisfied, your community is engaged and has a good quality of life. So that's a very good starting point as well.
So Mark, that was a fantastic result for council in terms of overall satisfaction.
Very pleasing and, well above our norms.
Yes, and it was also very good to see too about the quality of life that people expressed in terms of living in Willoughby.
And we were interested in that because it's not significant, but it's up slightly on 2019 in a COVID year. That's a good result.
Ah, fantastic. Now I think you're going to drill down into the nitty-gritty now of the individual services and facilities.
That's right. We've got 41 services and facilities. We ask importance and satisfaction of all of them. So we've got a lot of data to get through.
Okay, over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Deborah. Okay, so section 2 of the survey. This is where we asked about importance and satisfaction with 41 different services and facilities that are provided by council. And if you think about that, that's 82 questions. Importance asked 41 times, satisfaction asked 41 times. It is an enormous amount of data. So rather than bore you by going through each and every question, we're going to try and summarise the results down and compare where possible to other data. And the first way we will do that is to compare against your 2018 results. Now, there are only 17 of the 41 services and facilities where I can compare to 2018. But what I want to do is just give you a sense that overall on this chart, your results are very similar. Again, the questions in 2018 were slightly different, but generally your results in 2020 are very similar to 2018. And in fact, the two that are worth picking up on are down towards the bottom. Maintenance of bushland areas and attractive streetscapes in local centres. These are the two statements out of all 17 where you are significantly below your 2018 results. Now, we've only got 17 where we can compare, so we're missing a whole lot of other attributes, and so there might be other stories in there. But when you consider that you've got 17 attributes and 2 of them where you're below 2018, are to do with kind of the natural environment in terms of bushland and attractive streetscapes. It's interesting. And it's interesting because you had in the 12 months leading up to the 2020 research, you had some storms, which may well have impacted people's reactions. And so what we did was look at some of those results by ward. It's really broad, but when you've got 600 people, I can't go down to individual suburb, but I can look at it by ward. And the interesting thing here is if we look at just attractive streetscapes in the local centres, the 2 highest scoring wards for importance, so how important is this attribute to you? The 2 highest wards are Sailors Bay and West Ward. But then when it comes to satisfaction, the two highest are Middle Harbour and Naremburn. So it's almost as if Sailors Bay and Westwater say, this is very important to me, but they're less likely to say they're satisfied. So that might be worth exploring further. So that was one way of looking at the results, comparing you to 2018. The next way, and I apologise because this is a lot of data, is to just show you your scores compared to our norms based on thousands of other interviews that we've done for other councils. Now the table I've got here is half a table because the next slide is the continuation of it. But what I'm doing here is showing you your overall importance score versus our normative data. And you can see the difference in the right-hand side. And I want to just highlight two things on this slide. And that is the two areas where you are significantly above our norm. The first one is community and cultural activities, where in terms of importance, you're significantly higher. And community centres and facilities, again, significantly higher. So that's worth bearing in mind that you can see the cultural and community aspect, and they've both percolated up to the top in terms of importance. I'm not going to go through the rest of them. Suffice to say that on this slide, most of them are above, to some extent, our norm, but more importantly, they're probably just pretty close. This is the continuation now of that slide. This is the other 20 or so attributes. But this time, what we've got is down the bottom 4 where you are significantly lower than our norm. So importance, community rate importance, significantly lower than our norm. Mall cleaning, attractive streetscapes, council childcare services and council's volunteer programs. The rest of them above, yes, you're a little bit below, but again, you're pretty similar. And in fact, my main reason for showing you these two slides is not to show you how different you are, but actually to show you how similar you are. That was a list of 38 attributes where I could compare you to norms, and only 6 of them were significantly different. The other 32 were basically on par with our norms. So from an importance perspective, council is pretty similar to the norm. But then we move on to satisfaction. So how satisfied are you with those 38 attributes compared to norms? And straight off, I want to highlight up the top the 11 attributes where you are significantly higher than our norm. 11 attributes. And the other thing about this is that we're looking for themes in the data. We're looking for where comments or attributes that are similar have all percolated up to the top. So if we look at the first ones, local footpaths and condition of local roads. So 2 attributes about accessibility, about getting around, are where your satisfaction scores are above our norm. So when you see 2 attributes all percolate up to the top, that's quite important. Leadership and advocacy. Financial management, long-term planning, what I would consider to be governance issues. And again, I think we might have had 4 governance issues and 3 of them are all significantly above our norms. So that's important. This one's an interesting one. 4 statements about cleanliness and they're all above our norm. Graffiti removal, removal of illegally dumped rubbish, maintenance of street trees and mall cleaning. 4 attributes all to do with cleanliness and they're all above our norm. So that's important when, again, they've all percolated up to the top. There are more statements here where you're above the norm. And remember, this is page 1 of satisfaction. The key finding is page 2. This is the continuation of that previous slide. And what you will notice is for no attribute, for no service or facility, are you actually below our norm. So of the 38 attributes where I can compare your service facility to our norm, you are either basically equal to, because you've got a 1%, 2% difference, or in fact you are significantly higher, which was the previous slide. And this, I think, is in line with the very first slide I showed you, which is where your overall satisfaction with council was much higher than our norm. No surprises that your services and facilities are above our norm. Now, please don't panic. I don't expect you to read all of this. It's more for me just to give you a flavour. This is the 41 services and facilities that we asked about. And what we've done is plot it importance up the vertical and satisfaction across the horizontal. And so, for instance, something that is very important and the community is very satisfied with is going to be right up the top right-hand corner. So, for instance, safety in public areas, highly important, but also the community is highly satisfied. So that's the top right-hand corner is what we call maintain, high importance, high satisfaction. I just want to focus on the left-hand quadrant, which is called improve. Relatively high importance because it's way up the top, but relatively lower satisfaction. And I'm going to explain why I stress the word relatively. The dotted lines on the chart, so there's one on the vertical and there's one on the horizontal, they are based on our normative data. In other words, based on all the other councils we deal with, their satisfaction score is coming in there at about 83 or so, which is why the dotted line is there. Their importance score is just over 75, which is why the horizontal one is up there, just above the 75. Out of all of your 41 attributes, you have got 3 that are sitting in the top left-hand quadrant, the improve quadrant. And they're almost I was going to say higher order needs to some extent. Balancing population growth with services and infrastructure, traffic in parking, planning and building permits. Again, see the theme that's developed here. All 3 of them are about growth and how you handle growth in terms of traffic and so on. So that is the one area that the community is just saying, we've got to keep an eye on. Relatively high importance, relatively low satisfaction. Now, I can look at this another way. The dotted lines there are showing our norms based on other councils. The purple lines that have just appeared are actually your norm. So in fact, the purple line are going across, the horizontal has covered over the dotted line because it is in fact exactly the same point. And again, that's what I was saying before. Your importance score is basically on par with our norm. But your satisfaction score is a lot further over. So if you want to push yourself, like setting a stretch target, then what happens is in the top left-hand corner quadrant, the improve quadrant, actually becomes larger. You've got more opportunities here. Keeping the community informed, long-term planning, which is kind of related to the ones that were way over to the left anyway. Maintenance of street trees, providing quality customer service, financial management. Now that's if you really want to push yourself. The point I'm making is that already your satisfaction scores are above our average anyway. But it raises the question, what does council do for the next 2 years? Where do you focus your attention? Do you focus your attention at top right, maintain, because you're good at it? Do you focus your attention at improve quadrant, top left, because high importance, relatively low satisfaction, we need to work on those areas? Well, you do it by exploring the data in detail.
Mark, thank you. There's a lot of information there, 41 services in terms of how important they are and how satisfied we are.
A lot of information. The really pleasing thing is that you are equal to or above our norms on all 41 or all 38 where we can actually directly compare you. That's an astounding result.
Fantastic. Now it's given us some areas too that we can improve and lift further. So that's really helpful information too. But I think also you've indicated that there are some common factors that sit underneath them that would be worth paying attention to.
That's right, because you can look at your results and say, should we focus over the next 12 months, 2 years on what we're good at or what we're not good at? And it's more than that. So we have to do a regression analysis to try and understand the underlying drivers of satisfaction.
Fantastic, and I think you're going to make regression analysis simple for us.
I'm going to try. Thanks, Deborah. So, where do we focus our energy? On that maintain quadrant, where you're doing really well, or on the improve quadrant, where relatively low satisfaction given the high importance. The way to answer that is to step back and say, what are we trying to achieve? And in essence, you've got one dependent variable, which is overall satisfaction with council. That's the holy grail. That's what you're trying to effect change on. And you've got 41 services and facilities, and we ask about satisfaction and importance, but I'm going to focus on satisfaction with those 41 services and facilities. Let's imagine when I interview my first respondent, and say metric 1 is footpaths, and say the first respondent says, I love the footpaths and I love council. And the second respondent says, I'm not happy with the footpaths and I'm not happy with council. If I keep getting that combination of responses, footpaths are good, council is good, footpaths are poor, council is poor. If I keep getting that when I'm interviewing residents, I will soon get a sense that footpaths are a driver of satisfaction with council. Metric 2, on the other hand, might be, I don't know, libraries. And let's imagine the first respondent says, oh, libraries are great, council is great. But the second person says, libraries are not that good, but council is great. If I keep getting that pattern, which in effect is no pattern at all, it's just all messed up, I can pretty well say metric 2, libraries, isn't a driver of satisfaction. And so that's what we're looking for. And unfortunately, it's not easy because you've got to look at each of the 41 services and facilities by each of the 604 respondents and how they answered the overall satisfaction. So there's tens of thousands of data points. So we use regression analysis. And this is the output or partial output of the regression analysis. This chart goes all the way down to the floor. It has all 41 services and facilities. And each of the scores there give a sense of the contribution of that service or facility to overall satisfaction. The higher the percentage, the more likely it is to be contributing to overall satisfaction. So like I say, this chart goes all the way down. There are percentages down here, 0.1%, 0.2, 0.3. You cannot turn your back on any one of these services and facilities. Council has an obligation to do all of these. But which ones are most likely to affect change? And it is these ones that have come up to the top. And I just want to again highlight some themes because I'm always looking for what percolates up to the top. The first one here, maintenance of street trees, waste and recycling collection services, mall cleaning, attractive streetscapes. 4 attributes that have all percolated to the top in terms of being drivers of overall satisfaction. It's as if residents, and we know that 1, quality of life is good, 2, their satisfaction with council is good. So what they're saying is, let's just make sure the area stays clean and so on. So maintenance and cleanliness. Another theme that comes out, leadership and advocacy in the Willoughby Council area, financial management and long-term planning. So governance has come to the top. Again, out of 41 attributes, they've all come to the top. Those 3 governance issues. And here's another 2. Keeping the community informed and council providing quality customer service. So all about engagement, either engagement on a transactional basis or simply communicating and keeping the community informed. And you can see there that that accounts for 15% of the variance in overall satisfaction. So they're the key themes that are driving satisfaction. You must remember that everything is important, but these levers are perhaps the ones that you can use for affecting change because these are the ones that are most likely to be drivers of satisfaction. As an aside, there was another one there, maintenance of assets, such as community centres, libraries and so on, which is an interesting one, that it's come up on its own there as well. Now, what we've done is we're still looking at that regression analysis. Down the bottom here it says derived importance. That's the regression result. So for instance, maintenance of street trees I think was at 9.1, which is why it's all the way over to the right-hand side of the chart. So the horizontal axis is the regression analysis result. But going up the vertical axis is satisfaction. So what we're saying is, okay, you're telling us on the one hand they're important, but how satisfied were you with them? And what it's showing is, for instance, if you go to the top left, mall cleaning has got, out of this bunch of important attributes, it's one of the lower ones, but it's got really high satisfaction. Whereas if I come across here to the right-hand side, maintenance of street trees is one of the highest, if not the highest, when it comes to derived importance, and its satisfaction's a little bit low. So if I was council, it's relatively low. So if I was council, I would be exploring that further. I would be trying to find out what's going on in that area. We did some analysis earlier of street trees and so on, you might remember, by ward. So we could explore that further. So one more thing I want to do on this regression analysis. This is based on 41 services and facilities where we asked importance and satisfaction. But there was one other service or facility that we asked about that wasn't part of the 41, but it had exactly the same satisfaction question, so we can put it into the mix. And that question was right up the top there. So this is a regression analysis. It's the same as the slide 2 earlier, except we've added now a 40-second attribute, and that is satisfaction with the level of communication council has with the community. On its own, it accounts for 28% of the variance in overall satisfaction. So clearly what's going on here, and you can see that the other one circled, council providing quality customer service, 4.7, keeping the community informed, 4.3. I think they were 7.3 or 7.5 or something on the 2 slides earlier. They've dropped a little bit here because you've got so much of the variance being explained by question 10, the satisfaction one right up the top. So you can see just how important engagement is with the community as a driver. Let me just stress here, a regression score on a chart like this is not a satisfaction score. It's not telling you whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. It's telling you whether it's likely to be a driver of satisfaction. So that's worth remembering.
So that's enough about council. Now let's return to the community. And I think you've asked questions about what the community really values.
Indeed we do. You should never do a survey where it's just spoon-feeding everything to the respondent. It's good to ask them what's important to them. So we've got 2 or 3 open-ended questions where we say, you know, what is it that you value about living here, and what are your priorities for the next 10 years? And that's what we've got next.
So over to you then, Mark.
Thanks, Deborah. So section 3, a lot of what I've gone through so far is what I call pre-coded questions, where we have given the questions to the resident and said, rate this on a scale, rate this on a scale, and so on and so forth. But sometimes you should just step back and find out what's important to the community. And so that's what this next section is all about. So we've asked 2 questions here, what we call open-ended questions. And these are, we've not given them any answers to tick. We've simply said to them, in this case, thinking generally about living in the Willoughby City Council area, what do you feel is the best thing about living here? And we've got, with 604 respondents, 604 different answers. But we group them together into themes, and we've called them net subtotals. So we've got a lot of codes, but we've grouped them together. And the first code there is central location. So the convenience to services, the close to the city, the proximity to public transport. Almost 2/3 of your residents are saying, you know what, that's what's important to me. That's what I value about this area. The second one is natural environment. So the parks, the green spaces and beauty and area of the area and so on, 24%. And then the third one is community aspects, you know, feeling of safety and friendliness and the diversity of the area at 19%. Those are all very high scores when, as I say, it's an open-ended question where people could have basically said whatever they wanted, and we've been able to group them into those core themes. The same question was asked in 2018. Now, we didn't code it, we didn't do the survey for you in 2018, but what we've been able to do is pull together their codes from back in 2018, and you can see that the scores are similar. In essence, the top 3 back then was the top 3 now. So, I'm not concerned about a 63 this year, in 2020 versus a 72% in 2018. It's more the top codes in 2018 are still the top codes in 2020. The other open-ended question that we asked was, well, what about your priority areas for the next 10 years? So what would you change, or what would you like to see changed in the area over the next 10 years? The first one there is, again, a grouping of a whole lot of different comments, but improved or better maintained services and facilities. But hang on, haven't we just gone through and seen that your services and facilities have actually got above average satisfaction scores, yet 47%, 1 in 2 residents are saying that they need to be improved? So what I've done is just drill down into that code further. And you can see, interestingly enough, that the 47% is made up of traffic flow congestion, 10%, parking, 8%, public transport, 8%, roads, 8%. I think there's another one, there's bike paths and cycleways, 2%. So you can see that a lot of the answers here are about accessibility, which did come out as an issue earlier as well. So I guess the key thing here is most of them are fragmented, 1s and 2s and 3%, but if anything else, it's all around traffic and accessibility and parking and so on. The second code there was improved planning of the area at 22%. Now, when I showed you a quadrant slide earlier, at the top left, which we call the improved quadrant, it was relatively high importance, relatively low satisfaction. And I pointed out that the 3 attributes that were in that quadrant tended to be planning related. So it's no surprises that it's come out as the second main issue here on an open-ended question. So you can see that that 22% is made up of management of development to avoid overdevelopment, 18%, availability of housing, 2%, management of population growth, 2%, and so on. So that was the second main item that came out in the open-ended question. The others there, you can see it drops away. You've got 47%, 22%, and then Willoughby City Council practices 6%. So this is what council can do better in the future. Environmentally sustainable practices, 5%, and so on. But you can see where the focus of the community is in terms of those maintaining and improving roads and so on, and also the planning of the area.
So Mark, we're coming to another section now, which is about people's contact with council and also communication with and from council. And we saw in the last section that that was very important.
The previous questions have been more holistic, and what we want to do now is get down to the more transactional level to see how residents feel about individual transactions with council.
Let's hear it from you, Mark.
Thank you. So this next section deals with residents contacting council and how their experience was. It's a big section, it's got lots of questions. I've cut it down to basically 1 or 2 main questions. And that question is, how satisfied are you with the way your contact was handled? So of those that had dealt with council in the last 12 months, we simply asked them, how satisfied were you? 5-point scale from not at all satisfied up to very satisfied. And again, we're showing you the blue bar is your 2020 result and the grey bar is our normative data. And once again, we can create a mean score. Up the top left, the mean score for 2020 is 3.79, and in 2018 it was 3.71. Very similar results. And I must stress that the 2018 result was based on a different scale, and we've used an algorithm to sort of make it a 5-point scale. But it appears as if, the results are fairly similar. What I'm interested in is how does this satisfaction with contact result compare to our normative data? And your score of 3.79 is actually below our norm of 3.9. It's the first result, I think, in the whole presentation where we've actually got a metric that is below our benchmark. So what's going on here? I guess there's a few things. First of all, back in 2018, when the research was done, 26% of the community had contacted council in the 12 months prior to the research, so 26%. In 2020, when we did the research for you last November, it was 46%. So that's what the residents are telling us both in the 2018 survey, it was 26%, in the 2020 survey, it was 46%. That's an enormous increase. So we came to council with that information and said, it looks like perhaps you're below norm. Perhaps you're below norm because you've been overwhelmed by contact. So council then provided us with some contact data, and I've tried to summarise it at the bottom of the slide here. So what I want you to do is think about the 12 months from March 2019 to February 2020, so pre-COVID. There were 2 months in that period that were where you suffered storms. They were November 2019 and February 2020. And email volumes, so emails coming into council in those months were 40 to 50% higher than the 12-month average. So they just ballooned in those 2 months when you had storms. So there was obviously a concentration of inquiries. Phone volumes were also up, not as much, by 12%. So that potentially suggests that the storms in November 2019 and February 2020 have impacted the call volumes and the email volumes that councils had to deal with. But let's also talk about COVID. If we think about, again, that 12 months, March 2019 to February 2020, so pre-COVID, email volumes were up. So then compared to March 2020 to December 2020. So the 9 months of last year, the last 9 months of last year, email volumes were up 70% March 2020 to December 2020 compared to pre-COVID. Phone volumes didn't change. So you could see that there's almost been this shift that the COVID period, there has been more email coming in. Phone hasn't changed, you're still taking the same. So it seems to me like storms and COVID have meant an increase in contact with council, but it may actually not just be storms and COVID. It may be the fact that phone has stayed relatively steady, but email volumes have increased. It could just be partly a shift in the way you're working with the community as well. So for what it's worth, I would explore that further with the community. Now, we also ask a question in this section about how satisfied are you with the level of communication council has with the community. This is the question that I added into the regression analysis, the second version that became a main driver on its own. And what we're doing here is showing you the results of of 2020 in deep blue, and then our benchmark in grey. But we can also compare you with your 2018 result, so that top left-hand cell. And your score of 3.62 in 2020 is well above your 2018 result. Your 2018 result was again from a slightly different question. We've massaged the data to convert it from a different scale into a 5-point scale. But again, it does seem to be up on 2018. But when you compare it to benchmark, your score of 3.62 out of 5 is well above our norm of 3.46. So another metric where if you just talk at a more macro level about satisfaction with council's communication, not individual contact, but just general communication, it's well above our norm and is in keeping and in line with some of the other metrics we've been looking at. We also said to the community, so if you have to, through which of the following methods would you like to receive information from council? So how do you want us to talk to you? Interestingly, web, internet, 81% was the dominant answer. Email 72, followed by council's newsletter at 67%. It's actually really interesting that right up the top you've got digital communication, because I have worked with some other councils where it's almost letter in the mail is number one, but yours has been web, internet and email is right up the top, followed by the newsletter and then brochures, flyers and so on. There is no silver bullet. We've asked this question for many councils and there is no silver bullet. There's no one communication method. You've got to keep looking at a mix of communication strategies to get to the community. Just building on that slide, what we've done here is, it's still the same question, how would you like to be communicated to, but we've cross-analysed it by those who did contact council in the past 12 months versus those that didn't. And the reason we've done that is because, for instance, if you look at email, it's now 81% for those that have contacted council in the past and 64% for those that haven't. Council's newsletter, the Willoughby Update, it's 73% for those that have contacted council, which is significantly higher than the 62% for those that haven't. So you can see that there are differences, and those that have contacted council do have slightly different preferences, so keep that in mind.
Mark, our last set of questions were very specific ones around resilience. So we're quite interested in what the community saw as shocks like bushfires, floods for example, those sorts of events, and also some of those longer term stresses like housing affordability and climate change.
I think these are really important factors for a council to take on. You know, a lot of what we've been talking about this evening has been individual services and facilities, and council has to get that right. But that's not operating in a vacuum. You need to understand that your community has got shocks and stresses, has got wellbeing issues at times, and it's council's role in part to help them through those issues.
And it's also important for us to understand not just what's important to the community, but how well they feel that they can cope or how resilient they are themselves and what assistance we can provide.
And to that end, what we've done is put a question in which is almost like a proxy for resilience, and then looked at the differences between those that feel as if they're resilient versus those that may be struggling to see what are their pain points. So we go into some detail in this last section.
And it's also important too because every second year we do the community wellbeing survey, and this information also helps us, and we've got at least one marker question that's common. Absolutely.
By keeping questions similar across the waves, you are just every year keeping a tab on your community. Very important.
Fantastic. Looking forward to hearing. Mark.
Great, thank you. So the last section is a series of questions that were added in 2020 to deal with resilience within the Willoughby LGA. And in essence, you know, I don't have benchmarks for these questions. This is us setting a benchmark for Willoughby LGA. Now, we had 15 different shocks and stresses. Shocks are basically things like short-term bushfires, storms and so on. So short-term events that happen and pass on, as opposed to stresses, which are longer-term things, which might be climate change or the economy and so on. And what we asked people to do was go through a list of 15 shocks and stresses and tell us how concerned they are about each one, using a scale not at all concerned, code 1, up to very concerned, code 5. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail, other than to say that I guess the interesting thing for me was that there are a mix of shocks and stresses. So for instance, last summer bushfire is the highest level of concern. So that's a shock. COVID, probably more of a stress, I would say, because it's going to last a while, is second. Climate change is third. Economy is fourth. And then last summer storms and floods is fifth. The reason I'm making such a point about this is because I asked a similar question for another council last year, and their scores, and I'm just trying to, because I've scrolled them down here. Last summer's bushfire was 4.07 a mean score of 4.07. Last summer's storms was 3.87. So I think the first one, 4.07, was just under your score, but the storms 3.87 was well above your score. But the climate change was 3.27. And my point here is that the residents in that particular LGA were concerned about the shocks. That didn't translate into an understanding or a concern about the stresses, seemingly. Whereas in this LGA, the fact that climate change is there as the third one suggests that the community understands we've got shocks and we've got to be concerned about them, but we've also got to be concerned about the bigger picture, the stresses that are underlying potentially some of those shocks. So in that sense, I thought it was a good mix of shocks and stresses that were coming out. Now, this is only part of it because there were 15 and I think there's 7 or so shown here. The next 7 or 8 are on the second page. And again, I'm not going through these in detail because I really want to get to the bottom one. And that is your ability to cope with and adapt to change. We've treated that attribute almost as a proxy for resilience. If you think about it, your ability to cope with and adapt to change is a way of saying how resilient are you. So we have taken that one attribute and used it to analyse the other 14, which is this table here, and it's appalling, but please bear with me. The point of this was we wanted to compare the green column. Those are people who are not very or not at all concerned about their own ability to cope and adapt to change, so they're not concerned, with the red column on the right. They're people that are concerned about their ability to cope with change. And what we were hoping to find was 2 or 3 or 4 attributes where there were significant differences between those two groups. What we found was that for all 14, those in the right-hand column, the very concerned about their ability to cope, are significantly more concerned about all 14 of the attributes, hence why they've got the significance markers, compared to those that are not at all or not very concerned. So across the board, those that are concerned about their ability to cope are just concerned about everything. We have, however, highlighted 4 rows in light blue. Last summer's bushfires, climate change, last summer's storms, and transport stresses in the Willoughby area. The reason for highlighting those is because the difference between the green column and the red column on those 4 attributes is the smallest. So it's almost as if they're the more universal attributes. That is, they are a concern to everybody. Yes, the very concerned, the red column group, are still more concerned, but the gap's not as big. So they're almost more of a universal concern. So that's worth bearing in mind. We also asked an open-ended question to finish off, which said, what do you feel council could do to help you cope with and adapt to change? Open-ended question. We didn't give them any codes. Let them just go loose. And really what I wanted to highlight here is, again, we've cross-analysed it by the same people. Green column, they're not concerned about their ability to cope with change. Red column on the right-hand side, they are concerned. And the main response code that came out of this section was provision of information communication. And you'll notice, in fact, 17% for the green column, 19% for the orange in the middle, and 17% for the red on the right. The scores are the same. For the one code, the main code that came out, in other words, what can council do to help you cope, it was the same for everybody, whether they feel as if they can adapt to change or not. It's communication. Okay? So that's interesting. Okay, so summing up, pulling all this together. Overall satisfaction, 96% of residents are at least somewhat satisfied with the performance of council, significantly above our norm of 89%. So that's a great result. Quality of life is 97% above our norm significantly and has increased marginally on 2019, pre-COVID. Satisfaction with level of communication, 88%. It's slightly above our norm of 85%. And where we had 38 services and facilities where we could compare to our norms, all of them were equal to or above our benchmark norms. And in fact, in 11 cases, they were significantly above. So in terms of key metrics, it's a really strong performance. It's a great result for council. One of the better ones that we've seen. So what are the opportunities? If everything's so good, why don't we just, keep doing what we're doing? And I guess our role is just to challenge you and I guess bring to mind what the opportunities are for looking for improvements down the track. And the first one I would say is community engagement. It was an area of satisfaction. The community was satisfied with it, but it was also a driver of satisfaction. And the beauty of engagement is it's not just an attribute on its own. Some of the other ones we're about to just quickly talk about can be dealt with by actually engaging with the community and communicating with them. So you're killing two birds with one stone by talking to the community about other issues, you're dealing with those other issues and you're also engaging with the community. So what are some of those other issues? Good governance and leadership. This came up, and I'm talking here about financial management, leadership and advocacy and so on. These were statements that were in the survey that scored positively above our norms and also were also drivers of satisfaction. So they're an area where if you understand what communities' expectations are around financial management and so on, that can help you. You communicate to that and you can therefore make the community feel better because you've given them information about governance and you've communicated with them. Accessibility, we saw both on closed-ended questions and open-ended questions that people talked about parking, roads, cycleways, etc., etc. I could tell you that in 99 out of 100 councils, if I was to sit down around a table with residents and say, tell us about your gripes, in 99 cases, they're going to talk about roads as the first issue. It's just a truism that comes up virtually every time. And it has here as well, but you've also scored above average on some of those attributes. And so I would think it's more of a watching brief. Talk to the community, and I think it's related to planning as well. Talk to the community to see what their issues and concerns are and communicate to them about what you're doing. Cleanliness, an issue that came through both in terms of satisfaction but also as a driver of satisfaction. So the fact that we had several different cleanliness attributes and they all percolated up to the top, I think is worth pursuing and just keeping an eye on. Customer service, I link that back to some extent to engagement, how you deal with the community and how you service the community. But this is the slightly more transactional element to it as well, where, as I said, your scores for satisfaction with the transaction were slightly below our norms. It could be the sheer volumes that you're dealing with due to storms, due to COVID. It could be that there's a shift in the way people are dealing with council. I think it's worth exploring. And finally, planning. We saw that come out in the open-ended question. We saw that in where I did a quadrant analysis, and at the top left we had the improved quadrant, which was relatively high importance, relatively low satisfaction. It was planning related issues that were in that quadrant. So the community wants to feel reassured about that. And I think you can do engagement around that to help the community. And that's the presentation.